Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Nun Hey. We were in the Mishnah that dealt with the philosophers' questions to the rabbis, the Roman philosophers asking, well, if Avodah Zarah is so bad, then why does God let it continue existing? And we had the main answer being, well, if God got rid of all the sun, the moon, the stars, and all that, what, God's going to get rid of all that and ruin the world for everybody else just because on account of a bunch of sinners. That doesn't make any sense. And we ended with, I just wanted to fix the translation, the afikim are the streams. Okay, so we ended with saying the people are Avdim B'Chamala Levanav, to the sun, to the moon, to the stars, to the constellations, to the streams, and to the valleys. Okay, and then Yabetel Hamom Mipnei Shotim, right? God's going to ruin his whole world because on account of these foolish people. V'chein hu omer, and then Rabban Gamliel continues and quotes a pasuk that says this exact idea. Pasuk in Tzfanya, asef kol me'al pnei adama ne'um Hashem, is God, am I going to collect and destroy everything in the world? Asef adamu be'ema, what am I going to destroy the humans and the animals? Asef of hashamayim udgei hayam, I'm going to destroy the birds and the fish. V'hamachshelot et harishaim, that's the key part for us. And those things that cause the evil people to stumble. What God's going to destroy all these things God created just on account of evil people that stumble upon because of them. The halola adam himovdin. Do they worship the people? In other words, what Rashi says here is this means even la adam himovdim. In other words, they do, like they're there for, they serve the humans. It means like I should have read it better. V'halola adamim ofdim, and they work for humans, and therefore, if I wipe those out, I'm basically going to be in essence wiping out the humans in the world as well. Next section, another question that was asked: Sha'al Agrippus Sar Tzavat Rabban Gamliel. Agrippus, not the other Agrippus that we know about. This is actually the officer of the army of Agrippus. Who Agrippus the king was Jewish, but this Agrippus is a Roman army officer. He asked Rabban Gamliel, your God is like a fire that devours. He is a zealous God. Right? If God is a vengeful God and angry at the idols, well, that proves that the idols are meaningful, because people don't get jealous of people that are below them, right? A wise person gets jealous of a wise person, and a strong person, and a wealthy person for a wealthy person. To which Rabban Gamliel answered, Amar lo emshol lecha mashal. Lema davar domeh. To what is this like? Right? He's got a mashal for everything. La'adam shenasai isha lishto. Okay, try to think about this. Okay, a man takes on a second wife. Okay, this is further proof, I think, that in general, it wasn't so common, okay, having multiple wives, even though it's generally, we see in the Torah it's permitted, but in the time of the Mishnah, already very few people were doing this. Well, a man takes on a second wife. Chashuva mimenu emet kanaba. If she's more prominent or more important than her, then she won't be jealous of her. She'll understand why the husband took a second wife. But pchuta mimena mitkanaba. But if she's lower than her, she'll be very jealous. She'll say, "What? My husband needed a different wife and took someone lower than me, right? Beneath my status." That would seem to be very offensive. So there's something to be said for this. Amar le Zunin le Rabbi Akiva. Next section, Zunin, who's Jewish. Now we start to have Jews asking the rabbis questions about things they were troubled by. Okay, this isn't, I don't believe in God. It's not like the Romans saying, "Oh, your God must not be the right God." But here we have Jews questioning. And Zunin asked Rabbi Akiva, look, your heart and my heart, we both know that Avodah Zarah doesn't really have anything to it. But still, we see people, they walk into the temple, broken, like with broken bones, and they come back and everything's fixed. And as they walk in sick, they walk out healthy. Looks like the gods must be helping them. My timer, what's the reason? So comes Rabbi Akiva, Marlo emshol lecha mashal. I'll give you a parable. Lema devar domeh. What is this like? La'adam ne'eman shaya be'il He lived in a city, and everyone gave him items to watch without witnesses. Everybody trusted this person. And a lot of trust of the people in him. But there was one person who always brought witnesses. One time he forgot, and he gave him something to watch of his without bringing witnesses. The woman, the wife, jumps on the opportunity. So the wife of this person who's watching everyone's objects says, let's deny it. And no one, right, everyone will believe us because he always brings witnesses. And this time he didn't. It's our opportunity. Let's deny that he gave us anything and let's keep it. Amar la, he said to her, he says, just because this guy made a mistake or didn't do the right thing by basically, right, always bringing witnesses and then one time not bringing witnesses, what, we're going to lose our good standing in our community, right? We're very trustworthy people. It's not worth it for that one thing to lose our standing. Af kach yisurim. Such is suffering. Now, when God and his beitin up in the heavens sends someone to suffer, they make the yisurin, the sufferings, swear that they're only going to start on this day and end at this day at this particular hour. Val yidei ploni, val yidei sam ploni, and in this way, with this person and with this drug, okay, everything's set, and they take an oath on it. Kevan shegiaz manan latzet, and then let's say it's time for them to leave the person and stop the suffering, and exactly at that moment, halach zeh lebeit avodah zarah, the person happened to go into the house of idol worship. Amru yisurin dinu shalom etzeh. The yisurin said, on the one hand, we shouldn't really leave this person because then everyone's going to think that the idols are real. But then they go back and they say, there's the comparison, because this person made a mistake and went into an idol worship house. That means that we should not keep our oath. We had an oath. It happens to be. They went in at that exact moment. It was just a coincidence. And this Rabbi Yochanan says when it talks about chalayim, diseases that are bad and faithful. Very strange thing. What does it mean they're faithful? Ra'im b'shlichutam, they're bad and they're shlichut, they do bad things to people, they make people sick. V'ne'emanim b'shvuatam, they're trusted, trustful, faithful in their oaths. They keep to their oaths and they leave whenever the time is. Doesn't matter where the person is. Doesn't matter what conclusions people may reach, mistaken conclusions from that. Amalei Rava bar Yitzchak le Rav Yehuda, another Jew who asked the question of Rav Yehuda here. There's a place in our community, when the people need rain, this is, I guess, the story they tell about the idol. The idol appears to them in a dream. And says, slaughter me this person, and I will bring you rain. Shachtu legavra, and they slaughtered that person. V'atu mitra, and the rain came. So he's basically asking, explain this. I don't understand. Amar le, Rabbi Yehuda answered him, Hashti eva shechivna lo amri lechu hamilta. If I had died, I wouldn't have been able to say this. Thank God I'm still alive, and I could resolve this problem for you. To Amar Rav, because Rav said, my dichtiv, Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha otam l'chol ha'amim. This is an interesting pasuk. It's the beginning of the pasuk is, we don't want you to look up at the heavens and see the sun and the stars and the moon and all the hosts in the heavens. V'nidachta v'shtachaveta lahem, and you're going to then leave and go worship them. V'vadetem, and worship them. Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha otam l'chol ha'amim tachat kol hashamayim. That God distributed them or gave them out to the other nations to worship. Now, what does it mean God gave them to worship? So what do we explain here? Melamed shechlikan bidvarim. What does it mean chalak? Divided them out to the people? Well, what it means is hichlikan bidvarim kedei l'tardam min ha'olam. He smoothed it to them in words to take them out of this world. In other words, God appeared in that dream to see if people would follow this or not. Okay, now how can you explain this? V'hainu damarish lakish. Mai dichtiv im lelitzimu yalitz ulanavi mitain chen. It says in the pasuk, how to explain this pasuk in Mishlei. If for the scornful ones he will be scornful, and to the humble ones he will give grace. Okay, and this is, in other words, this actually comes up in a Gemara in Mako, very famous Gemara, where it says, "B'derech she'ata adam rotzeh lelech, ba molichim oto." The path a person wants to take, that's the path that God helps them on. So here we're going to continue in our Gemara. Bali tamei potchin lo, bali taher mesein oto. If a person comes to make themselves impure, God opens the door for him. If somebody comes to purify themselves, God helps them as well. And this is learned actually from Bilam. If you remember, Bilam goes, God says don't go, and then he says I really want to go, and then God says fine, go, because that's where he wanted to go, so God led him to go there. So that's the idea here, that God appeared in a dream to the people who were already wanting to worship this idol, and God wanted to basically wipe them out from the world and let them, he saw that they were already bad and wanted to kind of lead them in the way that they were going. Of course, there was free choice. They could have not listened. They could have said, of course, this is ridiculous. We're not going to slaughter a person in order to get the rain to come. But they ended up worshiping. But that's not because it was an actual idol that really did this. Okay, so the idea really behind all of this is that all of these stories, since we started this last Mishnah, is that God is behind the idols. Anything that you think of the idols makes it look like they have power. No, the power really all comes from God. Here we're going to start with our new topic of Yain Nesach, and this wine that the Gentiles, particularly the idol-worshipping Gentiles, would offer as libations to their gods. So now the issue is that a Jew, if a idol worshiper came in contact with the wine, the Jew is not allowed to benefit from that wine. So the Mishnah says, now the question is, at what stage is it considered wine? We know there's a process to making wine. It would go into the gat, which is it would be this kind of recessed area where they would trample on the grapes. They would tread on them, step on them. Then from there it would go into something called the tapuach. They would take whatever grapes were left, move them. It seems like it was somewhat in the gat. Okay, move them to this area where they would then put a beam on top or something like that, and press down the grapes, whatever was left after after stepping on the grapes. Whatever was left, there was still some juice in them, so they would leave it for a little while with that pressing on it to get any more juice out. From there, the gat had a little opening at the bottom, and that would kind of lead down into a pit. And in the pit is where the wine would collect. And from there, they would fill their jugs, and they would also let it settle. It was all process involved, but those are the different locations that we're going to talk about. So the question is, what stage do you have to worry already about Yain Nesach? So the Mishnah says, and I'll already preface this Mishnah by saying, this Mishnah happens to be, the Gemara is going to claim it's a very early Mishnah, and there was a later Mishnah from later in the time period of the Tanaim that switched things around. But right now, we're going to first learn our Mishnah. Then Rav Huna is going to come in the Gemara. We're going to have some questions on Rav Huna eventually, even though we answer some of them. We're going to eventually say, oh, this must be a problem. And then Rav Huna himself is going to say, actually, the Mishnah is all the Mishnah Rishona, the early Mishnah, and I hold by the later Mishnah. And then we're going to see the later Mishnah, and that's where we're going to end today's talk. So, Lokchim gat be'utam and alvei kochavim. Okay, you can take a gat be'utam, a gat where they were stepping on the grapes, from an oved kochavim, even though the oved kochavim, the idol worshiper, picked up in his hands and put it in the tapuach. So even though the person's hands touched it, which usually means it's a concern that maybe they offered it up to their gods, well, it's not a problem at that stage because it's not considered wine yet. It's still just, right, we just stepped on it. Now it's true there's some juice there, but that's not considered wine. Until it gets into the pit. So until it drips down that channel there and gets into the pit. So once it drips down into the pit, whatever's in the pit is forbidden if the Gentile comes in contact with it, but whatever's at the top is still fine. That's one issue. Second issue. You can trample on, step on the grapes in the gat, turning the Talmud bet now. But you can't actually pick the grapes with them. This is a totally different halacha. Rashi explains, because they put it, what they do after they take the grapes is they put it into a gat, and the gat is impure because they're Gentiles, and they don't have, right, the Gentiles carry impurity with them. And the problem, okay, what's the problem? So what if the Gentile makes it impure? Well, they say you're causing Tumah to happen. And now, what happens is at the early stage, they're actually not susceptible to impurity because there's no liquid on them. But once you start stepping on them and the liquid comes out, they're going to become susceptible to impurity, which means a liquid got on them, including wine, and this is wine. And when the liquid gets upon them, then they're going to be susceptible to impurity, and you're basically causing these things to become impure because you're doing it with a Gentile. And the assumption is that they're going to obviously step on them to make wine. And once they're going to do that, they're going to become impure. Now, what's the problem of making it impure? Well, at the very end of that first Rashi says, "Kasavar asur ligrom tumah lechulin shebe'eretz Yisrael." It's forbidden to create tumah in produce of Israel. If you have chulin produce, it's not sanctified, but it's forbidden to make even chulin impure. You're not allowed to do that. Okay, that's the halacha. Although we're going to see there's a machloken about this. And then the Mishnah says, and furthermore, Yisrael shu sevet tumah. If you have a Jew who's involved in, doesn't care about laws of impurity and is impure, lo dorchim v'lo botzrim imo. You can't step on the grapes with them, and you can't even cut grapes with them because what you're basically doing is we're going to see this later in the Gemara, they're going to call this, or in a bright, in the Mishnah, the second Mishnah, the later Mishnah, they're going to say you're helping the hands of sinners. Because Jews, now, Gentiles, you weren't helping the hands of sinners. You were just creating a situation where they were going to create something, they were going to take chulin from Israel and make them impure. This obviously is only relevant in Israel. Mishnah was written in Israel, so they don't really specify that. But if it's with a Jew's not allowed to make something impure. So therefore, if you're with a Jew who's making something impure intentionally, you're basically helping that person to sin. And that's that's a problem. But in that vein, we're going to have something that's actually permitted. Once the wine is made by this Jew who's impure and already made the wine impure, well, at that point, there's nothing that could be worse at this point. So, okay, you can take barrels to the God, and you can bring barrels out of the God. In other words, you can transport, because everything's already becoming pure. So you're not doing anything in the process of the impurity. You're not helping them sin at all, because it's already, the sin is done. Nachtom shuaseh b'tumah. Very similarly, if you have a baker who is also dealing with, their hands are impure, lo lashin v'lo orchim imo. You can't knead the dough. You can't arrange the breads, the loaves. After you knead them, right? They rise, and then you set up the loaves. Where you can deliver his breads to the baker, because then already they've become impure. Okay, we're going to get back to this issue of impurity soon, but right now we're going to start with the Gemara. So Rav Huna starts off with the first part. Amar Rav Huna. So first he just makes a statement, not connected to our Mishnah, and then we're going to start questioning him from three different lines in our Mishnah. Once the wine starts to move, okay, you start to get a little juice out, but it's just a little bit. But then once it's enough that it starts to move around, and particularly also go down into the bore, once it's starting to move, it's already susceptible to becoming yen nesach. So if a Gentile comes in contact with them, an idol worshiper, it's forbidden. T'nan, but wait, it says in the Mishnah, Lokchim gat be'utam min arvei kochavim ba'afa pi shenatal biyado v'natan l'tapuach. It's fine to do work with a Gentile, with this idol worshipping Gentile, even though he took it with his hands and put it in the tapuach. Now, we're assuming at that point it's already moving around. It's starting to stream down. So on Rav Huna, how does Rav Huna resolve this? Begat pikuka umele'ah. Begat pikuka umele'ah. It's where the wine press is stopped up, meaning that hole where the wine drips down is stopped up. You put a cork in there, and it's full. Why does full matter? Well, if it's full, then the wine isn't moving around. It's all just staying in one place. Right? When there's just a little bit there, it starts to move and trickle. But in this way, it's not. Okay, we resolved problem 1. Problem 2. Tashma be'eno aseh nesach ad sheyired labor. It sounds like only when it gets down to the bore it's a problem. But what did Rav Huna say? As soon as it starts to move around and trickle. Hachanami begat pekuka umale'as. Now they're going to say, also we could say that line is when you stopped it up and it's all full, and then as soon as you open it and it starts to get down to the bore, it's already a problem. Tashma, but wait, the real problem is in the very next part, which is yarad labor, masha babor asur, bashar mutar. Once it goes down to the pit, though, what's in the pit is forbidden, but what's up at top is still permitted, even though at this point for sure the wine up at the top is starting to trickle and move around, and Rav Huna said that's not a problem. So Rav Huna said, sorry, that is already a problem back then, and the Mishnah says it's not a problem at all till the wine gets into the bore. So Amar Rav Huna, at this point Rav Huna answers what I already told you he's going to answer, which is Kam b'Mishnah Rishona, Kam b'Mishnah Acharona. Well, there was an early version of the Mishnah, and that's the version of the Mishnah that we have. But I hold by the later version, Titania, as we see in a Braita. Barishona you ombrim bidad, and then we're going to say Chazru lamar dabad. Okay, these are Rashi Tevot abbreviations for the 3 halachot. So badad are the 3 halachot we saw in the Mishnah in a bit of a different order. Ein botzrim ima ovei kochavim begad. You can't cut the grapes, harvest the grapes with the Gentile, who's an idol worshiper. Why? Shasur ligrom tum'ah lechulin shebe'eretz Yisrael. Here we have it explicitly. You can't take chulin and help cause them to become impure, and that's what you're doing if you're working with this idol worshiper. Ve'ein dorchim im Yisrael shoseh perotav b'tumah. And likely you can't step on the grapes with a Jew because you're basically helping them to sin. Shasur l'seah yedei ovrei avera. And here you have it, because you cannot help people who are sinners. Aval, who are sinning, right? You're helping them to sin. Aval, what can you do though? Dorchim im ovei kochavim bagat v'lo cheshinan l'Rav Huna. Okay, so you can step on with the Gentile in the gat, step on the grapes. And this they're adding to the Braita. Obviously, Rav Huna didn't exist at the time of the Braita. They said they're obviously not concerned about what Rav Huna said. However, Chazru lomar, but later on they said dabad. Okay, what was the badad? Botzrim, right? You can do botzrim with the Gentiles. You can't be botzer with the Gentiles. You can't be dorech with the Jew. But you can be dorech with the Gentile, and we're not worried about the yein nesach issue. Now they say v'chazru lamar dabad, but then in the end they said dabad. Why dabad? What's dabad? Let's start with that, and we'll continue a little into tomorrow's daf because it's a short daf and we're kind of a mid-sentence. Ein dorchim ovei kochavim begat mishum de Rav Huna. You cannot trample, with the ovei kochavim in the gat. You can't step on the grapes, because of what Rav Huna said. Because once you do that, the wine starts to trickle, and already it's a problem of yein nesach. Ve'ein botzrim im Yisrael shoseh perotav b'tumah. That's the same. You can't harvest the grapes with a Jew who's going to cause impurity to get onto this chulin stuff, right? It's chulin. It should be okay. What's the problem with chulin? The problem with chulin, now we're going to really talk about it because we'll see a different opinion than what we saw before, which is chulin eventually, though, you have to take truma masrot, which means that when you take truma masrot from impure produce, you're basically creating a situation where the truma is going to be impure. So therefore, now you're not creating impure truma. What you're doing is you're creating impurity, and then when the truma is created, you're not making the truma impure because the truma is not there yet. But because it's going to have truma from there, and the truma that comes from there then will, by default, be tameh, comes from tameh stuff, that's basically prohibited to do, because you're creating a situation with truma. Now that's going to lead us to the next thing. But kol sheken she'en dorchim, and obviously besides that you can't be botzrim, you can't harvest it, because even at that point it can't even become impure. But the problem with harvesting is it will lead them to step on it, and once they step on them, they're going to be susceptible to impurity and will become impure. So you can't do any of that. Aval, according to the Mishnah Achrona, it's not just different in terms of don't step on the grapes with the idol worshiper, because it's already starting to flow, but also on this issue, they're actually more lenient. Because on this issue, they're saying it's actually no problem to create impurity in produce that doesn't belong to a Jew. Because if it doesn't belong to a Jew, no one's ever going to take Truma Masra from them, and then it doesn't really matter if you're taking chulin in Israel and making them impure, because there's no practical ramification. So that's the machloket, one of the other machlokot between the Mishnah Rishona and the Mishnah Achrona. So the Mishnah Rishona says, only when the wine gets into the bore are we concerned for Yenesech, and the Mishnah Achrona says, no, as soon as it starts to flow a little, it's already a problem. And they differ on, is it a problem with the Gentiles' produce to have it become impure or not? And if it is, then you can't be botzer with him at all, because even harvesting is going to lead them to trample, and you obviously can't step, right? Then, right, so you can't do the bitzira. Okay, 1 second. Right, yeah, but then, 1 second. Right, but it's not a problem of Yein Nesach. It's a problem of Tumah, but it's not a problem of Yein Nesach. Okay, so there we have our Gemara. We started off today with the philosophers' conversations about why are Avodah stars still in existence, and why do we see that idol worshippers actually get cured when they go to their temples and other things like that, or when they do what their gods told them to do. But we say, in the end, it was really God orchestrating all that, and it was just either coincidence or it had nothing to do with that, and it was God testing them. And then we got into the two versions of the Mishnah Rishona and the Mishnah Achrona about the Yein Nesach and the Tumah issues, both with a Jew and with a Jew who's impure, and a Gentile idol worshiper who carries impurity. Okay, with that, we finished for today. We'll come back to this tomorrow with the Yein Nesach, and we'll continue this topic for a while. Wishing everyone a good day.